So we've been talking a little bit about what Network Monitoring and Management 2.0 is. And again, that is our name for modern day monitoring and management practices. So the next question might be is how do you actually go about implementing some of what I discussed in terms of modern day network monitoring and management? We're talking about traditional versus some of the present day practices. And there's all sorts of terminology around exactly what we mean by this. So this is not 100% non-controversial. What I mean by that is that some of these terms, some people prefer to be applied to traditional network monitoring and management, and others will say, that's not really what I mean by present day network monitoring and management version 2.0, but we're just gonna dive right in. So, old school model, push versus pull. So what we mean by push is network telemetry. And this is a concept where perhaps the device that you're interested in or the service, the program, whatever it may be, is sending you data actively rather than you polling it. That's a nice concept. The reality is you may still need the poll to get this information, but you may do it in slightly different ways than we have done traditionally. Also, you can have what is called passive monitoring. And really what we're talking about here is looking at everything. So maybe you have a port that's replicated with all your incoming traffic data from external sources, and you simply use that replication and ingest all that information in, and that's passive monitoring. You're not actually affecting the traffic itself, it's simply being duplicated. Old school monitoring would involve more polling, and very traditionally, this involves using a protocol like SNMP, where you set it up on the remote device or perhaps on a Unix or a Windows server. You set it up and then you can go ask a question every so often about this device using an SNMP server that then asks the client for some information. You may even use also some agents that you install on the remote device, and then you use a program that also asks questions. And what's interesting with our more modern NMM 2.0 practices is we've come back to using agents quite a bit, actually. We also use the HTTP protocol to scrape information as well. So some of the programs we're going to talk about will ask you to install an agent that runs on your remote server, perhaps, and then the program itself will contact that agent and get the information that it needs, but in a much more efficient manner than, say, using a protocol like SNMP. It's a big mishmash of different ways of obtaining data. When you are pulling data, sometimes we might also call this synthetic. And by this, we mean that you may actually want to test your monitoring tools on your network by sending data through your network and looking at it and making sure that you are monitoring and receiving information about what you think you're monitoring. One of the issues around this is if you send data through your network that's not real world data, you may have unexpected results when you send real world data through your network. And a lot of this has to do with a concept that we call baselining, which is when you begin to monitor something or a network, it's a good idea to look at the data that you receive and the type of information that you're getting for a while to understand whether what you're seeing is normal or whether it's something unexpected. So you need to find the baseline. What does your network normally look like? How much noise is on it? How often do you see interfaces going up and down? How often are you scanned? All that type of information. So once we talk about present day practices of the push versus pull concept, network telemetry versus old school polling, another area of discussion is monitoring versus observing. And you'll note that I put the O11Y acronym down, and that's just a short way of saying observing. Essentially, observing is more freestyle, might be one way to put this, meaning we observe what information is outputted from our natural environment, such as our network, and we do not worry about the details of exactly the metrics we are trying to gather, but we're just gathering everything. We observe that, we look at that raw data, and we can derive conclusions and get information from that. Network monitoring and management tends to be more fine-grained or constrained, and we are actually looking for specific information that we're asking questions about. Okay, so how about a little bit more information about network telemetry, push or passive versus polling and pull? So traditional standards such as SNMP or agents, like the Nagios CheckMK agent that some people may use, That would be a traditional polling model, right? There's some push protocols that are available. These are protocols that people are trying to put in place on hardware devices, such as switches or routers, so that we can actually push data from them using a protocol versus having to have an agent. Because think about a router, it's very difficult to install somebody's third-party agent on a router and have it send you data. So you still actually do need, in most cases, for a device like a router or a switch, to actually pull that device using SNMP. There are other tricks. You can use SSH, and there are some more specific things like sending information via JSON, or using even things that are called like the Cisco Compact Google Protocol buffers. That is a mouthful. Or the Google Protocol buffers. You can go read about them, and they are used somewhat. But in reality, many of the tools we're going to show you, we're still using SNMP when we want to get information from our switches and routers. Now, to get information from servers that are running actual services for you, we would install agents, and some of these agents come from software stacks, and they have all sorts of funny names like Telegraph and Beats and Logstash and Node Exporter and Promtail, etc. And as many things happen in the world of computers, and particularly Unix and Linux, these names don't have too much meaning until you understand where they fit in the ecosystem of network monitoring and management, and we're going to show you that.